Okay, I think I'm going to start. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining this very great series that we've developed. This is Richard Joy, Executive Director for ULI Toronto. We're excited to present oh my gosh, I think it's the fourth in an ongoing series with Ryerson City Building Institute called The Future of Cities, a weekly discussion period that really focuses on the COVID-19 pandemic questions that surround cities, and particularly our city, as we look to the future. It's proving to be a very popular webinar, and so we're excited to continue this on again this week. Before we start, a couple things I want to cover off. You will be, not surprisingly, muted as an audience throughout the session with so many people, but we are asking you to submit questions through the Q&A feature. I will, at the very end of this panel session, curate some of the questions that come forward. As always, we won't be able to get to probably most of the questions, but we really encourage you to send them to us whether we get to them or not, because they really help us inform future programming. So appreciate you sending in thoughts and questions that might help us refine some of the focuses going forward. This recording is being, this webinar is being recorded and will be available to ULI members and through Ryerson City Building Institute after the fact, for those if you want to hear it again, or for those who aren't able to make it this time. And if you are tweeting, we'd appreciate if you use the hashtag Future of Cities. I'd like to next, and someone saying you can't see the panel members are us. We decided, I'll just quickly address that question. We decided we're just going to be voices and not heads on a screen, in part just because of the stability of the webinars. We've had some issues, so we just to take that possibility of any quality of audio or visual out. You're not seeing our faces, but so my apologies. So thank you to our annual sponsors. The work that we're doing at ULI, which has taken on a new dimension since the COVID-19 situation has hit us, is something that we are only able to do by way of the generous support of our annual sponsors. Normally, as is our course of business, we would have events that has a registration and event sponsorships and so forth. None of that can happen anymore. So our entire existence right now is reliant on these companies that are supporting the work that we do. So we want to just say to them, thank you very, very much. It's so important. Finally, if I could just go to one more slide, just a quick advertisement. On Friday, if you're interested, and this is a really interesting topic, and we're going to be exploring a lot more of these kinds of focuses, but we're focusing with Stantec and a number of other great panelists on pandemic-proofing hospitals. And this is from a physical design perspective. What ought we to be thinking about when we're thinking about hospitals? What lessons did we learn or didn't we learn from SARS when it hit the hospital sector particularly hard in Toronto last time? Some really interesting conversation is going to come out of that. I hope that you'll tune in. We will, over the course of the coming weeks, expand this pandemic proofing focus to other types of considerations. Obviously, today, a big consideration is main streets and the public realm. So we're very excited to continue to think about what the future looks like from the perspective of the experience that we're going through right now. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Cerise Berta, who is the Executive Director for Ryerson City Building Institute and our moderator for today. She will drive the next part of the program, and I'll join you on the other side with some of the Q&As. Cerise, over to you.
Thanks, Richard, and thanks everyone for joining us. Yes, it's our fourth session in our Future of Cities series, and in this series, We bring together Ryerson experts with external industry professionals. And today we are exploring the future of Main Streets. How can our local neighborhood retail survive and recover post-COVID-19? So with us today, we have such a brilliant panel who spend every waking moment thinking about these issues, thinking about retail and Main Street issues. So I'm looking forward to hearing their insights. So yes, let's introduce them, beginning with John Archer, who has over 2 decades of experience shaping vibrant retail neighborhoods. He is Chief Development Officer of 360 Collective, a unique retail consultancy. Welcome, John. And next slide, please. Tony Hernandez is a professor at Ryerson's Ted Rogers School of Management. He is also the director of Ryerson's Center for the Study of Commercial Activity. So thanks for joining us today, Tony. And next slide, please. Finally, Pauline Larson is an urban economist and the director of economic and community development at the Downtown Young BIA. Great to have you with us, Pauline.
Thank you.
And Pauline, we're actually going to kick things off with you. Can you start us off where we are at right now? What is the current situation on our main streets? And for you in particular, obviously, Downtown Yonge. I normally work at Yonge and Dundas with you, as you know, but I haven't been there since mid-March. So can you describe the impact on small business, but also the impact on services and restaurants and public space?
Absolutely. Thank you and welcome everybody. So just as a very quick intro for those of you that are not familiar with Downtown Yonge, we're one of the most diverse mixed-use districts in Toronto. We have something like 200,000 residents that live within a 10-minute walk of Yonge and Dundas, and about 700,000 daytime population. We have something like 50 million subway users in a typical year and something like 4 million square feet of retail space, which extends from small independent street front retail all the way through to the super regional mall at the CF Toronto Eaton Centre. So this is normally a very, very busy area, as you can imagine. So in March, I think it's fair to say that our district effectively ground to a halt. And if you will, close your eyes, I'm going to try and paint you a picture of what exactly that looks like. In March, foot traffic literally decreased by 50% year on year. In the first week of March, we actually saw an uptick in pedestrian traffic at Yonge and Dundas, 4% higher than 2019. But by the 5th week of March, pedestrian traffic was down 80%. So remember, in a very pedestrianized area like this, imagine the impact that that has on the streetscape and on public spaces and on malls. In addition to that, we know that visitors to our public spaces were in March and April about 25% of what they were in January and February. Much quieter, far less traffic, far less activation of our spaces. And perhaps most interestingly, with the work that my economic development team has been doing at Downtown Yonge, we know that about 1 in 3 of our businesses currently are open in physical space, and about 20% are entirely functioning with online sales. We also have some businesses that aren't doing any revenue generating business, either online or in physical space, and they are entirely focused on activating online so that they stay in front of their customers and their clients. But what I really want to picture right now is that there is an incredible sense of connectedness within this very diverse community. And I'll just give you 2 quick stats to try and illustrate that. So in April, which is of course the 2nd month that we've been in lockdown, we have been sending out an e-blast of key information to all of our stakeholders, maybe once or twice a week, depending on what announcements have come out. Our click rate for those e-blasts has been double the industry standard, and our open rate for those e-blasts has been more than double the industry standard. So we're seeing an incredibly high level of engagement amongst our stakeholders in our community. We also launched what I would call a COVID-19 interactive business directory in an interactive map format, which you can find on our website. And since April 22nd, so about a week, We've had more than 1,000 views and 52,000 impressions based on our social media channels. So again, the physical presence, and this is backing up what you know already, the physical presence is not there, but we have seen a very high and very encouraging level of engagement. I do want to highlight the fact that in an area like this, where you have very decreased foot traffic, you have stores that have shut down, many storefronts that are physically boarded up, and concrete barricades on the sidewalks, there is always the consideration of safety and inclusion, which for those of you who know us know that that's a very big focus for us. And I would like you to just consider how desolate and empty the street can feel without that activation of shoppers and students and employees and business owners. So two of the initiatives that we're currently focused on is to do with safety and inclusion. The one is working with our street front Main Street businesses around crime prevention in partnership with our neighborhood community officers at 52 and 51 Division of the Toronto Police Service. And we also provide a remote outreach support for businesses that are still open, as well as other community stakeholders, because there has been such a shutdown of the social resources available in the neighborhood. And often people come in and are asking for information from businesses on where to go for shelter or where to go for food. So we're providing that remotely currently through our community engagement team. So I think, you know, my key response to all this is that it is a healthy, let me put it this way, healthy, successful, and economically thriving neighborhoods depend extremely on positive activation, lots of foot traffic, the perception of safety and cleanliness, as well as a sense of welcome and social inclusion. And it is critical to safeguard all of those things as we move from crisis to mitigation and to recovery.
Thanks, Pauline. It's amazing. We often think of main streets as our stores and shops and restaurants, but it's also so many services that residents rely on. It's hard to imagine downtown Yonge with very little foot traffic, which is usually people are piling off the sidewalks, falling off the sidewalks. There's so many people. Thanks for that. So we're going to turn back the clock a little bit and talk about where we were at before the pandemic. So John, before COVID hit, Main Street retail in Toronto was already facing a number of challenges, such as increasing rents, spikes in property taxes, and competition from online retail. And John, you were part of a team leading the City of Toronto's retail Main Street study. In fact, all three of our panelists were involved with this important study, which looked at how to support main streets and small business. And I understand the final study is close to being released. So, so in the wake of COVID-19, John, are the challenges and solutions that are outlined in the study still relevant, and are they still helpful? And maybe help us understand what's in that study.
Sure. Thanks, Therese. Yeah, it was great to be involved with Pauline and Tony and other team members that are on a project that began probably around January 2019 and finished up in January 2020. And as you said, we're finished up, but we're just kind of obviously waiting for the final reports and everything to be published online. Right now, if you go on the website, the summary draft report from earlier back in October is still available. If you want to peruse that, but we're kind of hoping it does get released. It is a great resource and benchmarking, you know, going into COVID and post-COVID in terms of here's everything that you need to know from a retail Main Street perspective. And it really highlighted, you know, key things for us in terms of the importance of small and independent businesses and main streets across the entire range of Toronto is such a valuable resource here in the city, not only from a city building perspective, but also from an economic perspective, an economic engine perspective. But what's really key, as you said, was there was a lot of issues around property taxes and rent and things like that. And what came through was that the retailers, the small and independent businesses were really experiencing a lot of volatility. And so what they were looking for was greater stability. And unfortunately, that's not what they've got today. But, coming out of it, what is still relevant? I think, a lot of people have used this kind of term before. It's kind of interesting, but COVID has really kind of accelerated a lot of truths and trends that were already happening, and it kind of exposed some misconceptions and weaknesses out there. And so we know that retail was already transitioning and moving quite significantly away from competing just on price and selection. And so as Main Street retailers, they did have to find other ways to compete, and one of those ways was based on convenience. And so we in the survey, we had done over 5,000 consumer surveys and 500 or 600 business surveys, and both of them, from the consumer perspective and the business perspective, local really mattered to them. And not from the consumer perspective, not entirely that they didn't want all goods and services locally, but a good sense of some of those local goods and services, to be able to walk to them, to be able to access them. That they were shopping at shopping centers less frequently, that they were shopping at power centers less frequently. And as I said, from the business perspective, definitely, they wanted to make money, and profitability were important, but equally important and up there were contributing back to community and locating nearby in their neighborhoods was really important as well. So those rational and emotional reasons were important. So coming out of that, density, I think, still really matters in terms of going forward for the city and different districts. And so having the density of residents or in daytime and nighttime type of populations really is important. People are definitely shopping online, and everyone asked before, when are we going to kind of max out? And we keep seeing it growing. I think now today you can see what happens when we max out on online shopping. And it, as I said, exposes some of those misconceptions out there. There are stockouts and problems in terms of getting delivery and things like this. So yeah, from a convenience perspective, Main Streets and being able to buy products and interact that way is really important. Another kind of important truth out there is that local still matters, and as we're talking about, that people wanted to buy more local goods and they were interested in where things were being sourced. I think COVID just kind of furthers that in terms of, yeah, we want to know where it's sourced from, but we also want to know what the safety protocols are happening. Tony often talks about another one in terms of what was happening in terms of the last mile and some of the trends happening there in terms of retailers, is like that concept of how do you get the product to the consumer in that last little final steps. And we know that retail on Main Streets was changing and functioning differently leading up to COVID. And I think even after COVID, it will continue. And we see more showrooming, more kind of warehousing type functions. And so today, you have curbside pickups and delivery and all those kinds of things happening out of Main Street type retailers. So that's just kind of accelerating. But it also exposes some issues there from an urban design perspective. And I think the city is starting to address them too, is how do you deal with pedestrian queuing on the sidewalks? How do you deal with vehicular queuing? We've seen huge lineups at the Home Depots and things like that. So those are important. And other things kind of coming out of like, what does it mean for rent and things like that in terms of measuring sales productivity. Other trends, increasing automation. We're paying almost everything now when we go into the stores by card or some sort of app and things like that. We're not paying cash. And so just increased automation will just kind of keep happening. And really happy to see a lot of innovation. I know Pauline's going to talk a little bit more later on about some of the innovative things out there, but during the study, some of the newer businesses, documenting how they were, being more innovative and changing the role and function of retail from just that linear function of buying something to engagement, community building, experience oriented was hugely important. And so that's probably kind of one of those questions out there, is like, how do retailers and bricks and mortar continue to engage with their customers? And I know that a lot of them were doing kind of physical events, but how do you kind of move forward with that? I think that's kind of a key question coming forward. So those are kind of some of the things that came forward and just kind of like to share with you. And hopefully the report is out shortly.
Okay, great. We'll try and create a link to that when it is out on our website. It's actually really good to hear that local matters for people and that Main Street is seen as convenient, and then convenience isn't just online shopping. So, and people are probably craving that sense of community to go out and physically get their stuff. So going forward, Tony, next slide, please. In the next few months, as businesses gradually reopen, what do you think the new customer experience will look like on Main Streets? And what efforts are needed to support small businesses to operate safely in this new reality and to build the public trust required to encourage people to get back out on our main streets?
Well, thanks a lot, Cherise. Yeah, public trust is key to unlocking consumer behavior and really boosting consumer confidence. And that is obviously that's what drives Main Streets. And I think that's one thing that we often we miss or often don't look at enough, is that it all comes down to the customer. The customer's got to feel confident. The customer's got to want to engage, with Main Streets for them to be successful. And, key to that is health and safety. There's nothing really new in this. I think, you look at the work that many BIAs have been doing in terms of liaison with, the local police forces or with public health in their areas. They know that health and safety is a key aspect to get consumers out on the streets, essentially. And the current pandemic has really brought to light just how central that is to us. I'm sure a lot of people on the line have been making decisions as to how many times they go grocery shopping, what level of risk they're going to be taking on by doing that. Do they wear a mask? Are they wearing gloves? So we've really been making a lot of decisions as consumers around our health and safety, and the pandemic's brought that to life. So what are some of the things that we actually really know about where we're at? Well, one, we know the government mandated a whole set of closures, and they came up with a list of essential and non-essential businesses. And literally overnight, that changed the Main Street landscape. So closures were relatively fast, but we know on the flip side that actually businesses reopening is going to be a much lengthier process. So it's pretty easy to close up a store, but then to reopen it, you've got a whole set of factors that you've got to be looking at in terms of staffing, even cleaning the store, stocking the store, etc. Some of the things that we can make an educated guess at, well, we're entering this new phase of discussion has entered the kind of reopening phase of this, of the economic cycle within this. And obviously the Canadian model that we're beginning to hear about, and this is all still very early days, is around phased opening. You're hearing stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and so on. And I think that's really going to play out differently depending on what kind of business you are within a Main Street. So, if you were on that essential list of businesses, you're going to be ahead of the game. If you're viewed as a non-essential business, then you're going to be in those later stages, obviously, of opening up Main Streets again. So it's going to be a different story if you're a grocery retailer versus if you're a hairdresser. And obviously things such as physical distancing. Do you have to wear masks? Do you need gloves? Do you have to limit the number of people in the store? There's lots of details that still really need to be worked out. And we're thinking around, well, what's the timing of this? That's going to be the first set of questions. And then after, we think of the timing of phases 1, 2, and 3. If we look at the Ontario example, we're going to be getting into the minutiae of actually what does that really mean for the consumer. I'll pick up on a point that John made around, some of the has the pandemic really accelerated some underlying trends that we've seen in retail? And, the big question is around, this transition to online retail and the role that online plays and the role that delivery plays. And I think that this, in some ways, this is the big unknown, because we're currently, as consumers, we're really constrained in what we can do. So a lot of us who've gone online haven't gone online because we want to go online. We've gone online because that's the only way we can get product. And I was looking at some recent forecasts by Forrester that do a fair amount of work looking at e-commerce and the penetration of e-commerce across a range of countries. And some of the commentary from Forrester was that we've really accelerated some of the underlying trends by maybe 2 or 3 years, but we're not going to see this kind of landslide change to everyone suddenly going online. So I think there's a range of factors. We're looking at phased kind of change, but central to that is we have to feel safe, we have to feel secure, and we have to feel as though going back to the main streets isn't going to adversely impact our health. So there's lots of details that still need to be worked through, and yeah, health and safety is really central to all of them.
Thanks, Tony. That's fascinating. Yeah, and so the question is, can we hit the ground running? So the next question to John about the recovery efforts to date. We've heard about some that have been taking shape over the past month. The federal wage subsidy, of course, and the loan programs, but also the federal provincial commercial rent assistance program. So John, are any of these programs, do you think they're making a difference, and can they help? Can they help these businesses survive so they can hit the ground running?
In terms of my thinking and thinking about it for the last few weeks and stuff like that, in terms of some of these programs, I think the federal government has got a lot of it right from the get-go, and happy to see what's happening here in Canada and Ontario versus kind of some other places and in the US and stuff. I think from a retail perspective, economics is supply and demand, and it's important to kind of give the context that, in the last few years leading up to COVID, it was really, the Canadian economy was really based on a consumer expenditure type of thing. And so I think the immediate response out of the federal government to keep the consumer alive was a good first step and things like that. So the $2,000 a month, the very easy access and to get online, to get the money, guaranteed for 4 months, the 75% wage subsidy, is drastically important in terms of keeping some of the consumer aspects alive there. If the consumer doesn't, if the consumer stops spending, if we have 15, 20, 25, 30, whatever percent unemployment, then the unfortunate thing is that even from the supply side and the retail side, some of these businesses might not survive regardless, because the consumer can't spend enough. In terms of the commercial rent program, from the Main Street study, I think a lot of things that we learned from the survey is that a lot of small and independent businesses don't kind of operate in the kind of normal fashion. There's a lot of different things impacting them in terms of volatility and the marketplace, mistrust of, sometimes mistrust of government in terms of very libertarian in their attitudes. We have a lot of small and independent businesses that have language issues and newcomer issues and cycles of poverty and some issues at places in Toronto, low-income neighborhoods and things like that, where we're just trying to create a policy framework from the different governments that doesn't kind of fit squarely into the realities of how some of these small and independent businesses operate. We also know that the way that some of these small businesses fund themselves or started up, it's not necessarily traditional financing, but it's loans from family and friends and mortgaging the houses and things like that. So it's a little bit different compared to some more traditional businesses. Um, and I think the other important thing to kind of keep inside is that there's always a bit of turnover in retail. And so sometimes the media are, pointing out that, oh, well, this business closed or this business closed recently and stuff like this. And there's always been there's always a little bit of a natural turnover rate. And sometimes it's around 5 or 6% a year. And whether that's retirement or personal reasons or changing jobs or changing consumers and things like that. So those kind of things to, kind of keep in mind in terms of everything that's going on. But we do know that, small and independent businesses are a huge part of the Toronto economy, that, over 50,000 retailers in Toronto, 75, 80% were small and independent. 60% of those are kind of more micro businesses with less than 5 employees and things like that. So taking all those kinds of things into consideration, I think the emergency response with the commercial loan, maybe it has the wrong name, because I think when it was brought out, it was like, oh, it's going to be commercial rent, but it's really designed for a very unique set of small businesses, those that small businesses that do rent space rather than the owner occupied, those businesses that have either closed or lost vast amounts of revenue, and those that are dealing with a landlord that does have a mortgage. So you're not dealing with someone who's an owner occupied or someone who, a business owner who is mortgage free or anything like that. So in that sense, I'm hoping it'll work, but yeah, it's definitely geared to a very small subset. And I hope, some of those issues, like I said, the very libertarian and language issues and the way some of the small businesses operate, that they can access the loans. I think some of the good things, though, side benefits is that it is forcing a lot of landlords and tenants to talk to one another and kind of realize the hurt on each side. And as Tony, when we were talking before, Tony said to us, there's hurt all around. It's not like there's any businesses, even, some businesses are, on the surface doing well, but they're still having to rechange and retool and hire different people. And I think it's very difficult to get into a situation of a hierarchy of hurt amongst different businesses. I think, it's important to say these businesses are vital to the Canadian economy, to the Toronto economy, and it's one aspect of it, and going forward.
Okay, great. So next slide, please. Tony, building on this, many small businesses are not surviving, and many will not survive this. So should we be bracing for rising retail vacancies along our many main streets in the next few months and years? And how permanent will these be? And what can cities do to restore Main Street vibrancy, even in the context of vacancies?
Yeah, I think when you look at some of the commentary, and you hear from some of the small businesses, these are and using the term unprecedented, that gets bandied around so much. These are extremely challenging times, and I think the government and at various levels, they've been putting in measures in the best way possible to ensure that we maintain businesses as much as we can. But as we kind of move into this kind of next stage with reopenings, and where some of these subsidies and the various kind of stimulus packages start move to the background, those are going to be it's going to be continuing challenging times, because clearly the more restrictions that we place on businesses, the more costly it is for them to operate. So for example, if there's a whole series of signage and health and safety issues that the businesses have to adhere to, that all comes at additional costs. So that's really a kind of a key aspect of this, is that this isn't going to just be within the next few months. This will play out over the next year and onwards. So we do actually need to have some creative policy solutions. I think I've heard a lot from the various associations that I've been talking with and listening into on the need to coordinate efforts where possible to harmonize policies. I think one of the other challenges as well is when we look at main streets, they're not all just independent businesses. There's a fair proportion of chain stores, franchise stores, where you've got franchise operators who are having to navigate potentially different policies, across a region, across provinces, or across the country. So yeah, we really need to kind of try and get as many voices into the policies that are going to be drawn up. And I think, I'll give the example of the Retail Council of Canada. If there are policies that impact retailers, well, you really want to have the Retail Council of Canada involved so that they can provide, a collective voice for the retail industry as well. So I think that, there's some real challenges around creating these policies. We're also in a really, the policy environment is, a lot of this is knee-jerk. I mean, this is, okay, we need to bring in this emergency, the term emergency is being used in a lot of the policy moves right now. I think as we start rolling this out, we're going to have to really be thinking, or trying to think about, think through potential unintended consequences. So I'll give you an example in retail. So you offer, wage subsidies, and then a fair proportion of retail workers choose to not go into work because they can have a subsidy instead of actually going into work. So you can end up with unintended consequences from some of these policies, which can be very difficult to envisage. So I think we're going to see a lot of flexibility. I think we're going to see a lot of incremental changes to the policies that are going to be put in place. And we're going to see more and more, and the term playbook is used a lot right now, or guides, the actual sequence of steps that we need in order to get back to, a kind of a new normal. And I don't think we're going to necessarily see that one size fits all, which makes it particularly challenging for policy, because generally policies like to have a broader remit as opposed to being highly specialized. So I think it's challenging times ahead from a policy perspective. But, central to all of this has got to be, this kind of balancing act between health and safety and economic recovery. And, clearly we don't want to be putting in, we don't want to be putting in measures that put Canadians at risk. So, the concerns over, a second wave of the virus, are obviously central to a lot of these policy decisions. So I think this is going to be a longer term, drawn out process, and one that's going to see a lot of change over time. And that's going to require flexibility, and that's going to really require that, the small businesses, the BIAs, the retail associations, the restaurant associations, and so on, are really involved in getting their voice around the table to help shape what these recovery policies are going to look like.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tony. There's lots of questions coming in right now. We have one more moderated question for Pauline, and then we're going to turn to these to the Q&A. So next slide, please. Pauline, final question. It's a two-part question. So we've also seen the launch of a number of campaigns, a lot of public campaigns and community campaigns to support local small business. Many of them have been aimed at restaurants, for example. Can you tell us about some of these local initiatives and whether or not they're helping? And secondly, COVID-19 has certainly restricted retail activity. But I think we're seeing on our local main streets, and I'm certainly seeing this in my neighborhood, that local residents are continuing to shop on main streets with local retailers. Could this loyalty and trust be an advantage for Main Street recovery?
Good question. So after hearing the input from Tony and from John on the various other questions, and after listening to my opening picture of Yonge Street, I think what I'm going to start with is quoting something that one of our businesses sent through to the team this week. I think it really captures that kind of sense of community spirit that we're seeing in the neighborhood and in the city. And it was in response to a question that we asked our businesses for any advice that they would like to share for other businesses in the area during this difficult time. So the quote goes like this: love your business and work on projects that help adapt the changing times. Don't give up, because together we can make a difference. Make good use of this downtime to prepare your business for future success. Now, I realize that doesn't apply to every single street front business or every main street, but I found it very inspiring. And so in response to the question, I wanted to go out and look at a bunch of different initiatives that came from sometimes really unexpected places. We've seen the community police liaison committees step up and support their local restaurants. We've seen residents groups step up and support their local restaurants. The BIAs have been amazing in terms of the collaboration that they've shown during this period. And we've also seen a lot of businesses step up for the social agencies that are equally suffering during this period and still trying to serve the most vulnerable in our communities. So I'm going to mention a couple of creative initiatives, but let me proviso it by saying it was really hard to choose, and I really hope no one will feel bad that I didn't mention them specifically, but I had to choose a couple of examples. And I'm going to start with actually some of the really quick up and running initiatives that the City of Toronto has implemented very quickly and with very little red tape. Specifically, I want to mention the Business TO Support Center, which I believe was launched last week. Which provides one-on-one virtual assistance for businesses who want to apply for any of the COVID-19 related emergency response benefits. They got it up and running really quickly, but they've also committed to a 24-hour response time, which is amazing, and it's available to all businesses in the city. So that's something that I really want to give a shout out to. And allied to that is the Digital Main Streets program, which has been in existence for probably 3 or 4 years already, and provides virtual support to businesses that want to increase their digital footprint, whether it's a website or whether it's setting up an e-commerce platform. That program, which also provides one-on-one virtual assistance, has been expanded pretty dramatically as part of the COVID-19 response from the city, and I think it deserves a shout out too. I am also hearing that the city is working on a program to develop online stores at no cost for small independent businesses. We're going to see how that plays out in the next little while. Those all make sense because, as I think Tony mentioned earlier, one of the critical issues with these types of campaigns is that we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to duplicate each other. We need to collaborate, and we need to try and generate economies of scale for the biggest number of stores possible on main streets, whether it's street front, independent, and small businesses. At a community level, I think there are 2 initiatives that we are keeping an eye on right now that we think are very innovative. The one which you may have heard of is called distantly.ca, is the website address. It's a really interesting crowdfunding app that allows shoppers and communities to go online and make donations to their favorite local small businesses to allow them to try and generate cash flow during this time. It's a really interesting one and was launched, I believe, about a month ago. Another one that we're keeping an eye on is supportretail.ca, which is an initiative that allows shoppers to search for their local community Main Street retailers that may be open for walk-in, pickup, or delivery, and who they may not otherwise know are still operating. So those are 2 that I'm looking at a community level. Within the BIA world, I really want to mention that there's been an incredible sense of collaboration and community spirit within the business improvement areas. Whether it's a small BIA, whether it's a large BIA, we've seen everybody really coming together. And I put a question out to the economic development team at Downtown Yonge to say what are 2 of the examples that they think have been really, really interesting and really effective. So I want to do 2 shout outs. The one is Liberty Village BIA has set up a really interesting weekly forum for its member businesses to get together, to have a space to share best practices, share ideas, and support each other. And I think that is an incredibly smart initiative during a time like this. The other one that I really like, because it's very simple and very effective, is a campaign that the Riverside BIA has put in place, where they effectively printed out different very brightly colored posters to put in store windows to say, yes, we're physically open, or no, we're physically closed, but we're open online, or we're live streaming on Instagram, or whatever that particular store is doing. You literally can drive or walk down the street and get immediately a sense of what their activities are during the shutdown. And of course, I'm going to give a shout out to Downtown Young's team too, and that is that this week we launched a campaign called #YoungLocals, which is effectively a campaign about how to showcase our businesses, how in our neighborhood they are functioning, how they're navigating the lockdown, how people can support them, and where they are either trading online or working physically out of their stores, or activating via live streaming, for instance. And just to give you one example, yesterday we highlighted a business called the Morpheus Clinic of Hypnosis. They are continuing to function. They're able to do secure video consultations, but they're also posting free videos on YouTube and making sure that they're providing resources to the community. Another example in our neighborhood that I want to give a shout out to is Scaddabush Restaurant at Yonge and Gerrard, which has been very innovative in responding to the lockdown. Not only are they doing takeout and delivery, but they've also taken some of their most popular menu items and created meal kits that you can order and prepare at home. So we've seen some really amazing creativity and some really interesting innovation. And I think that what I would say is that going forward, many of these types of innovations may well be good enough to stick around and to continue and to perform part of what that business is offering is. The question about whether or not they're helping, I think we're only going to know what the net outcome is once we have a more fulsome picture, not only of who has suffered from some pretty severe challenges, but also as those benefits from the various different government programs start to be felt by the businesses. I don't think we know yet what that net outcome is going to be. But I am willing to bet that small and independent businesses do have the advantage of social capital. They have a sense of trust. They are living and working very often in their own communities. If you're a business that's a neighborhood staple, you're established on the street, you're well known to your customers, you've stayed in front of your customers and your suppliers during the lockdown, I do think there is a trust, a social cohesion that will stand those businesses in very good stead as pandemic restrictions ease. So that would be kind of my 2 cents worth on that question.
Okay, great. Thanks, Pauline. This is such a rich topic, and I would love to talk about more great examples because there are so many examples out there. But we are so over time and we've got to jump to some questions, and Richard is busy curating those questions. Richard, I'm sure you're aware that there's a lot of questions coming in both the Q&A box as well as the chat box. So I'm going to hand it over to you to give us the first question.
Okay, I apologize. I know this was advertised to be ending at 12:45, so we're past that point, so some people may have to drop off, but there are a lot of questions that have come in, and those that have gone into the chat box, I think many of them have made their way to the Q&A, but still we're not going to get to all of them. So I'm going to just be very, very selective here, and I'm going to pick on some of the future focused questions in particular. So maybe I'll pick two. One is from Dina Grazer, and she's asking whether coming out of this, there'll be a greater appetite for landlords to experiment in leasing arrangements to keep their tenants. And she cites an example of the short-term leasing arrangements with base fees and a proportion of revenues being the way that the rental lease arrangement works versus sort of a straight up lease. I know that is happening in a number of cases already in Toronto, particularly along Ossington. I'm aware of some that really put the landlord and the retailer both have sort of skin in the game. Another one that's maybe just a different topic, but also future focus is around pilot projects. We've saw obviously pre-COVID the King Street project. Will is there an opportunity when you think about the, looking at how we share space? This, by the way, is coming from James Pio, I think it is. I wrote it down. I don't know if I wrote it down right. To favor pedestrians over motorists in the Main Street public realm environment. So those are two big future questions. Pick and choose which ones you want to answer.
Okay, who'd like to start here?
Maybe I'll have a response to the landlord question and the need for creativity from the landlord side as well. I think that there's going to be, if we're seeing increased, there's two issues. One obviously is maintaining the current roster of tenants from a landlord perspective, and then in the cases for dealing with vacancies, how you're going to need to be more creative and maybe more open to entertaining shorter term leases, the kind of pop-up, shorter term kind of animation of the property in order to, transition it back into maybe a longer or mid-term kind of lease. So I think from the perspective of the landlord, they're going to need to be looking at ways in which they'll be able to respond to the demand from potential tenants. And, there could be an increase in demand for shorter term, lower risk commitments on the part of businesses looking to open up. And also just, ensuring that we're keeping the streetscapes vibrant. So it's always better to have, even if it's a temporary tenant, it's better to have a tenant in there that kind of serves for the collective good, as opposed to, having a landscape of boarded up properties. So I think there's going to be a real impetus and there will be a real kind of push for landlords to be working with tenants and realizing that, that we will be in a recovery period, and that you need to change your business model accordingly.
Can I add something to what Tony just said? Cherise?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Oh,
sorry, I was
sorry.
on mute.
No worries. I was just going to 100% agree with Tony. And for those of you listening on this webinar, Ryerson actually does have a very interesting resource that might be worth a look right now, which is a pop-up knowledge commons. It looks at a number of different pop-up projects that have been undertaken in recent years throughout Toronto, but through other jurisdictions as well. But specifically what's of interest is where they have played a social and community role as a precursor to economic and retail development. So it's a tool that can be used for not just a retailer popping up, but it could start with a gallery space, which then morphs into something bigger. So I think there's some really good tools there. It is available, I believe, on the Ryerson website. And that's probably if you've got a bit of time at home to do some reading, this might be a good time to have a look at it.
Yeah, and I'll just add that, I agree with Tony and Pauline in terms of, and the question of lots of more experimentation. We can say from the Main Street survey that there was a lot of issues around landlord-tenant issues and even not really understanding the difference between a triple net lease, a net lease, gross leases, and things like this. And some retailers don't have any leases at all. So again, lots more communication and like the ideas of the kind of profit sharing but one of the recommendations out of the Main Street project for the City of Toronto was more of an advocacy role and help in understanding some of these small and independent businesses, what types of leases they're signing and trying to be creative there.
Great. Richard, do we have time for another question or should we wrap things up?
I think we'll do one more question. And that's the good thing is which one do I pick? There were a couple of questions with relating to the how our Main Street retail might leverage itself or might pivot itself, perhaps is a better way of putting it, to the increased online retail that's going on now. So coming out of this, when we're allowed to be back on main streets, but we've developed a habit of using online more. Are there some obvious ways that our main street environments might adapt to that reality?
Can I give that one a tonk?
Sure.
Go for it.
All right, it's Pauline. So I happen to have the numbers at hand that may be of interest. So as part of the campaign we've been doing with our businesses, we've been asking, what can we do to most support you during this time and as we go into recovery? And we've seen about 65% of our businesses say they want ongoing support on digital promotions. But we've also seen a solid 20% or so saying we need to have an independent assessment of the true economic impact of COVID before we make decisions going forward. And I think that's what's been so interesting about this entire period, is that the sands are so shifting. And we're often trying to make decisions when we don't yet know what the final outcome will be. So I would say that for us, what's really interesting is that question. What does this really look like? Because we don't actually know that yet. So at best, we can probably develop different scenarios on how we can move forward, but we probably can't choose a single path.
Okay, great. And I think that we'll have to wrap things up there, but it sounds like we're going to stay tuned for the Main Street study. And just a yes or no question from the panel. Will the Main Street study be revised in any way to take into consideration what's happening right now?
It's not being revised. I think what's going to be happen is it's not going to, the report will stand as is, but we will look at it going forward and make revisions and suggestions going forward to it. So the report stands, but there'll be like addendums or something probably coming out of it.
Okay, great. Great to know. Lots of questions about the Main Street study. So we're going to have to wrap things up. If we could just advance to the next slide, please. Here's where you can find more information and track down our excellent panel. So with that, I want to extend a warm thank you to our panel. We're so grateful for your time and thoughtful expertise. So thank you, Pauline, John, and Tony. And finally, thank you to ULI for partnering with Ryerson on this series. And mostly thank you to all of you for taking the time out of your busy day to tune in. And we're grateful because it's a very crowded, competitive webinar space these days. And we hope you can join us next week for our next in the series. That's the next slide, please. Future of Public Space. People are very interested in this topic, so it should be a good one. And then finally, the final slide, I believe, is another advertisement for the webinars tomorrow for the pandemic proofing of hospitals for ULI. So thank you again, everybody. See you then.
Charisse, if I could
yes,
just,
please.
sorry to interrupt, just to say there's been some requests, Pauline, for some of your slides and information, and maybe you could let us know if that could be made available. We could do that, and we could post it on the event pages of both CBI and ULI if that is something you could make available. And also, I assume to all the panelists, we could provide your contact information because it sounds like there's some interest there. So we'll talk to the panelists offline, and if that's something that could be made available, we'll do that. But just wanted to quickly capture those last little bit of inquiries. Back to you, Charisse.
Yep, sounds great. And all of our webinars are available eventually, the recordings on both of our websites. That's it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Take care.